I'll create a new story about a person who wasn't invited to their brother's wedding and what happened next. My name is Emily, and I'm 33 years old. I always thought family meant something special until the day I checked my mailbox for weeks on end and found nothing, no wedding invitation from my only brother, Michael. The silence was deafening. I called, I texted, I even emailed his fiancée, nothing. So when the wedding weekend arrived, I made a decision that changed everything. I booked a spontaneous trip to a place I'd always dreamed of visiting, and what happened there completely transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined. Before I share my unexpected journey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. If you've ever felt excluded by the people who were supposed to love you most, hit that subscribe button. This story might just give you the courage to turn your own heartbreak into something beautiful, just like I did. Growing up, Michael and I were inseparable. Only 2 years apart, we were the classic definition of sibling best friends. We built elaborate backyard forts, created our own secret language, and defended each other fiercely against neighborhood bullies. Our parents often remarked that they'd never seen siblings so close, so protective of one another. "You two against the world," our father would say with a proud smile as he watched us conspiring over breakfast cereals or collaborating on school projects. Our bond continued through high school, where Michael, always the more outgoing of us, would make sure I was included in social gatherings, despite being the younger sibling. When I struggled with math, he tutored me patiently until the concepts clicked. When he needed help with his English essays, I'd stay up late helping him refine his thoughts into coherent paragraphs. We were a team. Things began to shift when Michael left for college. He chose a prestigious university 3 states away, while I stayed closer to home attending the state university where our parents both worked and could provide me with free tuition. The distance created natural changes in our relationship, but we still called weekly, and holidays were joyful reunions filled with inside jokes and late-night conversations, catching up on everything we'd missed. It was during Michael's junior year that he met Catherine. She was studying international business, came from a wealthy East Coast family, and had ambitions that stretched far beyond our modest Midwestern roots. Michael was immediately smitten. Their relationship progressed quickly within 6 months. He was spending holidays with her family in their Martha's Vineyard summer home, rather than returning to us. I tried to be supportive. During our increasingly infrequent calls, I listened enthusiastically as he described Catherine's accomplishments, her family connections, and their plans for the future. I ignored the subtle condescension in his voice when he compared their cosmopolitan lifestyle to my simple existence back home. I told myself he was just excited that he'd eventually find balance between his new life and his family ties. After graduation, Michael and Catherine moved to New York City, where her father helped secure them positions at a prestigious financial firm. Their lives became a whirlwind of networking events, charity galas, and weekend getaways to places I could only dream of visiting on my teacher's salary. My brother's social media transformed from casual photos of friends and family to carefully curated images of success and affluence. Meanwhile, I built a life I was proud of. I became an elementary school teacher, specializing in working with children with learning disabilities. I bought a small but charming house with a garden where I grew vegetables and kept chickens. I formed deep friendships with a tight-knit group of like-minded people who valued community, creativity, and purpose over status. I dated occasionally, but hadn't found someone I connected with deeply enough for a serious commitment. Michael's visits home became rare events. When he did come, Catherine usually had a last-minute reason to stay in New York. On the few occasions she joined him, her discomfort was palpable. She would make comments about the quaintness of our hometown, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, ask probing questions about property values and local politics that always seemed to have a judgmental edge, and find subtle ways to highlight the gap between their lifestyle and ours. Our parents, eager to maintain a relationship with their only son, bent over backward to accommodate Catherine's preferences, replacing our traditional family recipes with dishes from the trendy restaurants she mentioned, redecorating the guest room to match the aesthetic of boutique hotels she favored, carefully avoiding topics she found provincial or unsophisticated. I tried to connect with Catherine genuinely, wanting to welcome the woman my brother loved into our family. I asked about her work, her interests, her family. I invited her for coffee when they visited, suggesting we get to know each other better. She was unfailingly polite, but distant, always having a reason why we couldn't spend time together without Michael present. "You're trying too hard," Michael told me during one visit after I'd suggested Catherine and I might go shopping together. "Kate has a very demanding social calendar. Just let her be." I noticed he had started calling her Kate rather than Catherine, something she only allowed from her closest friends and family. It was a small thing, but it symbolized how far inside her world he had been accepted and how firmly I remained on the outside. Despite these changes, I still believed in the foundation of our sibling relationship. We shared history, blood, countless memories. When Michael called to tell me he had proposed to Catherine and she had accepted, I was genuinely happy for him. I immediately offered to help with wedding planning, envisioning this as an opportunity to rebuild some of the closeness we'd lost. "That's sweet, Em, but Kate's parents have it covered," he said. "They've hired one of the top wedding planners in Manhattan. It's going to be quite an event." "Well, I'd love to help with whatever I can," I persisted. "Even just addressing invitations or assembling favors. Anything to be part of your big day." "I appreciate that," Michael replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'll talk to Kate and see if there's something you can do remotely." He never brought it up again. When I asked in subsequent calls, he was always vague. The planning was still in early stages, or they were considering various options, or Catherine's mother had taken charge of that particular aspect. I began to get a sinking feeling, but I pushed it aside. Surely my own brother wouldn't exclude me from his wedding. We had our differences, but this was a momentous life event. Of course I would be there. Months passed. Through mutual friends and family, I heard details about the upcoming wedding. It would be held at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Catherine had chosen a designer dress that cost more than my yearly salary. The guest list included several minor celebrities and at least one state senator, but no invitation arrived in my mailbox. 3 months before the wedding date, our mother called me, her voice tight with discomfort. "Emily, have you received your invitation yet?" I wanted to coordinate our travel arrangements. "No," I admitted the reality I'd been denying, finally impossible to ignore. "I haven't received anything." There was a long pause. "That's strange," she said finally. "I'm sure it's just an oversight. I'll mention it to Michael when I speak with him tomorrow." The next day, I received a text message from Michael. "Sorry about the invitation mix-up. We had to make some tough decisions about the guest list. The venue has strict capacity limits, and Kate's family has a lot of important connections we needed to accommodate. You understand, right? We'll celebrate together another time." I stared at the message for a long time, unable to process what I was reading. My only brother was getting married, and I wasn't invited. Not because of venue capacity. The plaza could accommodate hundreds of guests, but because I didn't make the cut. I wasn't important enough, connected enough, valuable enough to warrant a spot at his wedding. I tried calling him, but the call went straight to voicemail. I sent a reply, "Michael, I don't understand. I'm your sister. How can I not be at your wedding?" Hours passed without a response. Finally, late that night, another text arrived. "It's complicated, Em. Kate's family is covering most of the costs, and they have expectations about the guest list. I fought for Mom and Dad, but we had to draw the line somewhere. Please don't make this harder than it already is." The pain was breathtaking. I spent that night alternating between tears and anger, between self-pity and indignation. How had we come to this? How had my brother become someone who could so easily discard our relationship for the sake of social climbing? In the morning, I called our parents. Their discomfort was palpable, their excuses for Michael weak and unconvincing. It became clear they knew about this decision well before I did, and had chosen not to warn me, perhaps hoping the situation would somehow resolve itself without confrontation. "We're so sorry, Emily," my mother said. "We told Michael we thought it was wrong, but ultimately it's his wedding. We can't force him to include you." "Are you still going?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He's our son," my father replied softly. "We don't approve of his choices, but we can't miss his wedding." I understood their position, but it didn't lessen the sting of betrayal. The parents who had once celebrated us two against the world were now tacitly accepting my exclusion from one of the most significant family events of our lives. The weeks that followed were dark ones. I went through the motions of my daily life, teaching my students, tending my garden, feeding my chickens, but inside I was hollow. Friends tried to console me, expressing outrage on my behalf, offering distractions and support. I appreciated their efforts, but couldn't shake the profound sense of rejection. Then, about 2 weeks before the wedding, something shifted. I was grading papers at my kitchen table when a thought struck me with sudden clarity. I was giving Michael and Catherine exactly what they wanted. My hurt, my anger, my obsession with their rejection was allowing them to dominate my emotional life. I was still centered around their world, just occupying the negative space they had assigned to me. In that moment, I made a decision. I would not spend the weekend of my brother's wedding sitting at home scrolling through social media for glimpses of an event I had been deemed unworthy to attend. I would not give them the satisfaction of knowing I was nursing my wounds while they celebrated. Instead, I would give myself the gift of adventure. I would go somewhere I had always wanted to visit, but had never prioritized. I would create memories of my own that had nothing to do with weddings or family obligations or social hierarchies. That night, I researched destinations, my excitement growing with each possibility. By morning, I had made my choice. I would visit the small coastal town in Maine, where my favorite childhood novel had been set. For years, I had dreamed of seeing the rocky shore's historic lighthouses and quaint fishing villages that had captured my imagination as a young reader. Now, I would finally make that dream a reality. I requested time off from work, booked a charming bed and breakfast overlooking the harbor, and arranged for a friend to care for my chickens and garden. As the wedding date approached, I felt a growing sense of anticipation rather than dread. I was reclaiming this weekend for myself, transforming it from a symbol of rejection into an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. The day before I was set to leave, I received an unexpected call from my cousin Jessica, who lived in Boston and was planning to attend the wedding. "Emily, I just wanted to check in on you," she said. "This whole situation is so messed up. I can't believe Michael would do this to you." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. "But I'm actually doing okay. I'm going to Maine tomorrow for a little adventure of my own." "Good for you," Jessica said. "Better than sitting around feeling sorry for yourself. Although," she hesitated, "there's something you should know about the wedding." "What's that?" I asked, unsure if I really wanted to hear more details about an event I had been explicitly uninvited from. "Catherine's family has been difficult throughout the planning process. They're treating it more like a networking opportunity than a celebration of love. There are rumors that several guests received invitations that specifically mentioned the net worth requirement for wedding gifts." I couldn't help but laugh. "That sounds about right." "Michael seems miserable, Emily. When I saw him last week, he looked like he hasn't been sleeping. He mentioned you asked how you were doing. I think he regrets his decision, but doesn't know how to walk it back." For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my brother. But then I remembered the dismissive text message, the months of silence, the easy way he had discarded our relationship to please his fiancée and her family. "He made his choice," I said finally. "Now I'm making mine. I hope he finds happiness, but I'm done putting my life on hold waiting for him to remember I exist." Jessica sighed. "I understand. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this with a lot more grace than most people would. Have a wonderful time in Maine. Take lots of pictures." As I hung up, I felt a surprising lightness. The conversation with Jessica had crystallized something for me. This trip wasn't about spite or avoidance. It was about choosing joy over bitterness, growth over stagnation, possibility over pain. Whatever was happening at the Plaza Hotel that weekend was Michael's reality. Maine would be mine. The next morning, I boarded a plane with a sense of adventure I hadn't felt in years. As the aircraft lifted into the clouds, I found myself smiling at the unexpected turn my life had taken. Sometimes the most painful rejections lead to the most beautiful journeys, if only we have the courage to book the ticket. Maine welcomed me with breathtaking coastal views and the distinctive scent of salt air and pine forests. My bed and breakfast was everything I had hoped for a lovingly restored Victorian home, perched on a cliff overlooking a working harbor. My room featured a window seat where I could watch fishing boats coming and going the lighthouse, on the distant point flashing its steady rhythm as darkness fell. The proprietor, Mrs. Eleanor Sullivan, was a woman in her 70s, with silver hair always neatly pinned up and eyes that crinkled warmly when she smiled. Upon learning I was traveling alone, she took me under her wing with a blend of respect for my independence and grandmotherly concern for my well-being. "Breakfast is served from 7 to 9, she explained as she showed me to my room. "But I'm always up by 6 if you're an early riser and need coffee. Dinner is your own affair, but I'd be happy to recommend some local spots depending on what you're in the mood for." That first evening following Mrs. Sullivan's recommendation, I found myself at a small dockside restaurant where the catch of the day had been swimming in the ocean that morning. I sat at a table by the window watching the sun set over the water, as I enjoyed the freshest seafood I'd ever tasted. For dessert, I had wild blueberry pie, Maine's specialty, with a scoop of homemade vanilla ice cream. As I savored each bite, I realized with surprise that I hadn't thought about Michael's wedding once since landing. The beauty of my surroundings, the warmth of the locals, and the simple pleasure of delicious food had completely absorbed my attention. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months felt lighter, not gone, but no longer overwhelming. The next morning, the day of the wedding, I woke early and joined Mrs. Sullivan in her kitchen. She was mixing batter for blueberry pancakes and greeted me with a cheerful smile. "You're up with the fishermen," she noted. "Coffee's fresh, help yourself." As I poured myself a cup, Mrs. Sullivan studied me with perceptive eyes. "You know, in all my years of running this place, I've gotten pretty good at reading people. Most folks who come here alone are either running from something or searching for something. Sometimes both. Which are you, if you don't mind my asking?" Under normal circumstances, I might have deflected such a personal question from a near stranger. But something about Mrs. Sullivan's straightforward manner and genuine interest made me want to be honest. "Maybe a bit of both," I admitted. "My brother is getting married today in New York. I wasn't invited." Mrs. Sullivan raised her eyebrows, but didn't interrupt. "He's marrying someone from a different world, wealth status connections. I guess I don't fit into the image they're trying to project. So instead of sitting at home feeling sorry for myself, I decided to come here. This place has been in my imagination since I read The Secret of Whistling Cove as a child." "Margaret Holloway's book." Mrs. Sullivan's face lit up. "That's one of my favorites. Did you know it was based on this very town?" I nodded, pleased by her recognition. "That's exactly why I chose to come here. I always dreamed of seeing the real Whistling Cove." "Well then," Mrs. Sullivan said decisively, "after breakfast, I'm going to draw you a map of all the places from the book. Most tourists miss them, but a true fan deserves to see where Eliza found the mysterious shell that started her adventure." True to her word, Mrs. Sullivan sketched a detailed map on the back of a paper placemat marking spots that corresponded to locations in the beloved children's novel, The Hidden Cove, where the protagonist found a shell that whispered secrets from the sea, the crooked pine tree where she met her first magical friend, the old lighthouse keeper's cottage, where the climactic scene took place. Armed with this literary treasure map, I spent the day exploring the town and its surroundings, finding joy in recognizing places I had only visited in my imagination before. At each location, I took photos and made notes in the journal I had brought along, documenting my own adventure, alongside memories of the fictional one that had captivated me as a child. By late afternoon, I found myself at the lighthouse point, sitting on a rocky outcropping and watching waves crash against the shore. The September air was crisp but not cold, carrying the distinctive scent of salt and seaweed. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries mingling with the rhythmic sound of the waves. It was there, surrounded by natural beauty and childhood nostalgia, that I finally allowed myself to think about Michael. At that very moment, he would be standing at the altar in the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by hundreds of guests chosen for their social standing, rather than their genuine connection to the couple. Was he happy? Was this elaborate performance truly what he wanted? Or had he lost himself in Catherine's world so completely that he could no longer distinguish between his own desires and the expectations placed upon him? I realized with sudden clarity that I felt sorry for him, not in a condescending way, but with genuine compassion. My brother, who had once been so authentic and unafraid to be himself, was now living a life dictated by appearances and connections. He had sacrificed family bonds for social advancement, depth for breadth, authenticity for acceptance. In contrast, I was sitting alone on a rocky shore in Maine, but I was surrounded by beauty, pursuing a personal dream, and being true to myself. In that moment, I understood that being excluded from Michael's wedding might have been one of the best things that could have happened to me. It had forced me to confront painful truths about our relationship. Yes, but it had also liberated me from the cycle of hope and disappointment that had characterized our interactions for years. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, I made a silent promise to myself. I would no longer measure my worth by my brother's recognition. I would build a life rich with authentic connections, meaningful experiences, and personal growth. If Michael ever found his way back to the values we were raised with, I would welcome him with open arms. But I wouldn't put my life on hold waiting for that day to come. With that resolution firm in my heart, I stood up, brushed the sand from my clothes, and began the walk back to the bed and breakfast. I was looking forward to dinner at a local pub Mrs. Sullivan had recommended, followed by a quiet evening with the book I'd brought along. Tomorrow was another day to explore another opportunity, to create memories that were wholly my own. I had no way of knowing that back in New York events were unfolding, that would eventually bring my path back into intersection with Michael's, not on his terms but on mine. Life has a way of creating symmetry where we least expect it, of balancing accounts in its own time and its own way. But that evening, walking along the shore with the lighthouse beams sweeping over the darkening water, all that mattered was the peace I had found within myself and the adventure that still lay ahead. The pub Mrs. Sullivan had recommended turned out to be a local institution, a cozy establishment with worn wooden floors, nautical decorations, and a menu written on a chalkboard above the bar. The Saturday night crowd was a mix of locals and visitors, the atmosphere warm and convivial. I found a small table near the fireplace and ordered the house specialty clam chowder and fresh-baked bread, baked. As I waited for my food, I noticed a man about my age sitting alone at the bar, sketching in a notebook. He had tousled dark hair, glasses, and an air of comfortable solitude that resonated with me. Occasionally, he would look up at the room, observe something, and return to his drawing with renewed focus. The server delivered my chowder, momentarily distracting me. When I looked up again, I found the man from the bar standing beside my table, notebook in hand. "I hope this isn't too forward," he said with a slight accent I couldn't immediately place. "But I noticed you at the lighthouse point earlier today. The way you were sitting, looking out at the horizon, it was a perfect composition. I'm an illustrator and I couldn't help sketching the scene." He turned his notebook toward me. "Would you like to see?" On the page was a beautifully rendered pencil drawing of a woman, unmistakably me, sitting on the rocks, her hair blown by the wind, gazing out at the sea, with an expression of peaceful contemplation. It was intimate without being intrusive, capturing a moment of private reflection with sensitivity and artistic skill. "This is beautiful," I said, genuinely impressed. "You're very talented." He smiled, seemingly relieved by my positive reaction. "Thank you. I'm Daniel, by the way. Daniel Rue." "Emily Thompson," I replied. "Are you visiting too, or do you live here?" "A bit of both," he explained. "I'm from Montreal originally, but I've rented a cottage here for 3 months to work on illustrations for a children's book. It's about the Maine coastline and its legends." "That sounds fascinating," I said, then found myself adding, "Would you like to join me? I'd love to hear more about your project." Daniel accepted my invitation, and what I had expected to be a solitary dinner turned into hours of conversation. We discovered shared interests in literature, art, and education. Daniel taught art classes to children in Montreal when he wasn't working on book illustrations. He had a quiet humor, an attentive way of listening that made conversation flow effortlessly. As the evening progressed, I found myself sharing the real reason for my solo trip to Maine. Daniel listened without judgment, his expression thoughtful. "Family can be complicated," he said when I finished. My sister and I went through a difficult period after our parents divorced. She chose to live with our father while I stayed with our mother. For years, there was tension, unspoken resentments. We're in a better place now, but it took time and willingness on both sides to rebuild that relationship. I'm not sure if Michael and I will ever get to that point, I admitted. This wedding situation feels like a turning point. Either our relationship evolves into something more authentic, or it fades into occasional holiday phone calls and obligatory birthday messages. Sometimes space is what allows healing to begin, Daniel suggested. You're doing something brave using this moment of rejection as an opportunity for growth rather than retreating into bitterness. That takes courage. His words resonated with me, validating the decision I had made to come to Maine rather than wallowing in hurt back home. As we parted ways at the end of the evening, Daniel mentioned that he often sketched at a cafe near the harbor in the mornings. If you're interested in seeing more of the book illustrations, I'd be happy to show you, he offered. No pressure, of course. I found myself looking forward to the possibility of seeing him again. Not in a romantic sense necessarily, though. I couldn't deny he was attractive in a thoughtful, artistic way, but because our conversation had added an unexpected dimension to my solo adventure. Connection with a new person, unencumbered by history or expectation, felt like another form of freedom I was granting myself this weekend. Back at the bed and breakfast, I checked my phone for the first time all day. There were several missed calls from my parents and a text message from my cousin Jessica that simply read, "Call me when you can, drama at the plaza." For a moment, I was tempted to ignore these communications, to maintain the boundary between my peaceful Maine experience and whatever was unfolding at my brother's wedding. But concern eventually won out. I called Jessica first. "Emily, thank God," she answered immediately. "Have you talked to your parents?" "Not yet," I replied. "What's going on?" Jessica took a deep breath. The wedding didn't happen. Michael called it off about an hour before the ceremony. I sat down abruptly on the edge of my bed. What? Why? I don't have all the details, but from what I've gathered, there was a huge fight between Michael and Catherine's father this morning. Something about the prenuptial agreement. Apparently, there were clauses Michael hadn't been aware of until the last-minute restrictions about where they could live, how many children they could have, even requirements about Michael changing careers to work for Catherine's father's company. That sounds controlling, I said, stunned by this turn of events. It gets worse, Jessica continued. When Michael objected, Catherine sided with her father completely. She told Michael he was being ungrateful and that her family's connections and financial support were the only things that would ever make him exceptional. It was brutal, Emily. Michael finally saw what everyone else has been seeing for years, that they viewed him as a project, not a partner. I felt a complex mix of emotions, shock at the dramatic turn of events, vindication, that Catherine and her family had finally revealed their true nature so explicitly, and concern for my brother, despite everything that had transpired between us. "Where is Michael now?" I asked. "With your parents. They're all heading home tomorrow. He's devastated, of course, but I think there's also relief mixed in with the hurt. It was like watching someone wake up from a spell." After thanking Jessica for the update, I called my parents. My mother answered, her voice weary. "Emily, honey, what a day it's been." Jessica told me what happened, I said. "How is Michael doing?" "He's processing," she replied carefully. "It's a lot to absorb all at once. He's been apologizing to us repeatedly about everything, the way he's been acting these past few years, the wedding invitation situation with you, all of it. I think he's finally seeing things clearly." "That's good, I guess," I said, unsure how to feel about this sudden remorse after years of growing distance. "He asked about you," my mother added. "Wanted to know if you were okay what you were doing instead of attending the wedding. I told him you'd taken a trip somewhere but didn't share details since I wasn't sure if you'd want that." "Thank you," I said, grateful for her respect of my privacy. "I am okay. Better than okay, actually. Maine is beautiful, and this time away has given me some perspective." "I'm glad to hear that, honey." There was a pause then. "Michael mentioned wanting to talk to you when things settle down. I know he has a lot to make up for, but I hope you'll be open to hearing him out when you're ready." "I'll think about it. I promised, not wanting to make any decisions in the emotional aftermath of such dramatic events. Give him my, well, not congratulations, obviously, but tell him I'm sorry things turned out this way and I hope he's all right. After hanging up, I sat for a long time looking out the window at the moonlight reflecting off the harbor waters. My brother's wedding day had turned out to be transformative for both of us, just not in the way either of us could have anticipated. While Michael was confronting the painful consequences of the choices he'd made, I was discovering new possibilities I might never have explored had I been included in his original plans. There was a certain poetry to it all, a symmetry that suggested perhaps our paths, though divergent for years, might eventually find their way back to each other. But that reconciliation, if it came, would need to happen on different terms than before. We had both changed too much to simply return to the relationship of our childhood. With that thought, I turned off my light and settled into bed, the sound of distant waves lulling me toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring another day of exploration in this beautiful coastal town, another opportunity to continue the journey of self-discovery that had unexpectedly emerged from rejection. And perhaps sometime in the future, a new chapter in my relationship with Michael, one built on mutual respect and genuine acceptance rather than obligation or expectation. For now, though, I was exactly where I needed to be, in a charming room overlooking a harbor, in a town I had dreamed of visiting since childhood, with the promise of coffee and conversation with a thoughtful artist in the morning. Sometimes the universe has a way of giving us exactly what we need, especially when our original plans fall apart. The remainder of my time in Maine unfolded like chapters in a novel I hadn't known I was writing. Each day brought new discoveries, hidden coves with perfect skipping stones, local artisans creating pottery and jewelry in seaside studios, a marine research center where I spent a fascinating afternoon learning about ocean conservation efforts. Daniel became an unexpected but welcome companion for parts of this exploration. We met for coffee the day after the non-wedding and established an easy rapport that balanced connection with independence. Some days we explored together his knowledge of artistic composition, helping me see the landscape through new eyes. Other days we pursued separate interests, reconvening in the evening to share stories over dinner or drinks. By the time my planned departure date arrived, I was reluctant to leave. The week had given me not only a respite from emotional turmoil, but also a taste of a different kind of life, one defined by authentic experiences, rather than social obligations, by personal growth, rather than external expectations. "You seem different than when you arrived," Mrs. Sullivan observed as I checked out of the bed and breakfast. "More peaceful." "I feel different," I admitted. "This place has been exactly what I needed." "The ocean has a way of putting things in perspective," she said with a knowing smile. "Will you be back?" "Definitely," I promised. Sooner rather than later. Saying goodbye to Daniel was more difficult than I had anticipated. We had formed a connection that felt significant despite its brevity. We exchanged contact information with genuine intentions to stay in touch, and he showed me the final sketches for his children's book, including a character he had added, a teacher with a garden and chickens, who helped the protagonist understand the language of coastal birds. "Inspired by a certain visitor," he admitted with a shy smile. "If that's okay." "I'm honored," I told him, touched by this creative commemoration of our meeting. On the flight home, I thought about how to approach the situation with Michael. Jessica had kept me updated with occasional texts throughout the week. The aftermath of the canceled wedding had been messy. Catherine's family threatening legal action over non-refundable deposits, mutual friends taking sides, Michael retreating to our parents' house to avoid the gossip and recriminations circulating through his social circle in New York. By the time I landed, I had decided on a middle path, neither rushing to his side with immediate forgiveness nor maintaining the distance that had grown between us. I would give him the opportunity to reach out when he was ready, and I would listen with an open mind, but also with clear expectations about how I deserved to be treated going forward. That opportunity came sooner than expected. As I was unlocking my front door, juggling luggage and collecting mail that had accumulated during my absence, my phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen, the first direct contact from him in months. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, M." His voice sounded smaller than I remembered, stripped of the confident polish he had acquired in New York. "It's me. I I was wondering if we could talk. In person, maybe." I just got home from my trip. I said, neither accepting nor rejecting his request. "I need a little time to settle in." "Of course," he said quickly. "Whenever you're ready. I just There's so much I need to say to you, to apologize for." There was genuine remorse in his voice, but I reminded myself of the pattern that had developed over years. Michael prioritizing his new life until moments of crisis sent him retreating to the comfort and acceptance of his old one. I needed to know that any reconciliation would be based on real change, not just temporary vulnerability. "How about coffee on Saturday?" I suggested. "The place near the farmer's market." "That sounds perfect," he agreed, relief evident in his voice. "Thank you, Em, for being willing to see me at all. I know I don't deserve it after everything." After we hung up, I moved through my small house, reacquainting myself with a space that reflected my values and choices. The bookshelves filled with well-loved volumes, the kitchen where I cooked simple but nourishing meals, the garden visible through the window, where my vegetables had continued to flourish under my friend's care. It was a modest life by the standards Michael had adopted in recent years, but it was authentically mine. The days until Saturday passed quickly as I returned to my teaching job, caught up with friends, and processed the experiences of my Maine adventure. I spoke with Daniel several times, our conversations flowing easily across the distance, exploring ideas and sharing observations about our respective daily lives. There was potential there, a connection worth nurturing, though whether it would evolve into romance or friendship remained to be seen. Saturday morning arrived sunny and mild. I arrived at the coffee shop early and chose a table by the window, ordering my usual chai latte and settling in to wait. When Michael entered a few minutes later, I was struck by how different he looked from the last time I had seen him nearly a year earlier at our parents' anniversary celebration. Gone was the perfectly tailored suit, the expensive haircut, the carefully cultivated air of sophistication. Instead, he wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his hair longer and less styled, his posture less rigid. He looked both more like his old self and somehow fundamentally changed, as though the external trappings he had adopted in New York had been disguising something essential about him that was now visible again. He spotted me and approached hesitantly as if unsure of his welcome. "Emily, thank you for coming." "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Would you like to order something first?" "In a minute," he said, sitting down and meeting my eyes directly. "I need to say something first. I am so sorry for everything. For the way I've treated you these past few years, for not standing up for you about the wedding, for putting Catherine and her family's expectations above our relationship. There's no excuse for any of it." His directness surprised me. I had expected equivocation, perhaps attempts to justify his choices or minimize their impact. Instead, he was offering a clean acknowledgement of the harm he had caused. "What happened?" I asked, not just about the wedding, but about the years of growing distance that had preceded it. Michael sighed deeply. "I got lost. That's the simplest way to put it. Catherine and her world were so dazzling at first. The connections, the opportunities, the sense of being part of something exclusive and important. It was intoxicating. And then gradually it became a trap. There were always more expectations, more hoops to jump through, more parts of myself I had to set aside to fit into their vision." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that it triggered an unexpected wave of affection. By the time the wedding planning started, I was barely recognizing myself anymore. When Catherine's parents insisted on a curated guest list that excluded you, I should have put my foot down immediately. Instead, I told myself it was a small compromise for the bigger picture, that we'd make it up to you somehow. That hurt, I admitted quietly. More than I can really explain. Not just being excluded from the event itself, but what it symbolized, that I was an inconvenient part of your life, someone who didn't fit the image you were trying to project. "I know," he said, his voice thick with regret, "and there's nothing I can do to undo that hurt. All I can tell you is that the moment Catherine sided with her father about the prenup defending these controlling stipulations about our future, something finally clicked into place for me. I realized I was about to legally bind myself to people who saw me as an asset to be managed rather than a person to be loved. And in trying to please them, I had become someone who would hurt his own sister to maintain appearances. He paused, emotion making his voice unsteady. I called off the wedding for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest was UM. In that moment of clarity, I suddenly saw with perfect clarity how much I'd thrown away chasing approval from people who would never truly give it. And I felt ashamed, deeply ashamed. His raw honesty disarmed me. I had prepared myself for a more guarded conversation, one where I would need to advocate for my own feelings against his explanations or justifications. Instead, he was laying himself bare, acknowledging the full extent of his mistakes without deflection. "What happens now?" I asked. "Where do we go from here?" "That's up to you," Michael replied. "I want to rebuild our relationship, but I know trust has to be earned. I'm moving back to the Midwest. I've already applied for teaching positions at several schools in the area. Catherine's father made sure I lost my job at the firm as soon as I called off the wedding, but honestly, I was never happy there anyway." "Teaching," I echoed, surprised. Michael had been passionate about education in college before the allure of Wall Street and Catherine's world had redirected his ambitions. He nodded, a small smile appearing for the first time. "History and social studies, hopefully at the high school level. It's what I always wanted to do before I convinced myself that success meant a corner office and seven-figure bonuses." We talked for over 2 hours, our coffees growing cold as we navigated the complex terrain of hurt forgiveness and the possibility of a renewed relationship. Michael listened more than he spoke, truly, hearing my perspective on how his choices had affected me. He shared more details about his relationship with Catherine, the subtle ways she and her family had isolated him from his roots, the incremental shifts in his values and priorities that had seemed reasonable in the moment, but had gradually transformed him into someone he no longer recognized. "Mom said you went on a trip instead of sitting home during the wedding weekend," he said eventually. That was really good, Em. Taking care of yourself instead of letting my actions define your experience." "I went to Maine," I told him, finding myself eager to share this part of my journey. "To this coastal town I've dreamed of visiting since I read that children's book series in elementary school. The one about the girl who finds the magical shell." "The Secret of Whistling Cove," Michael exclaimed. "I remember how obsessed you were with those books. You made me play lighthouse keeper for hours." We both laughed at the memory, and I felt something shift between us, a tentative bridge forming over the chasm that had separated us for so long. I told him about Mrs. Sullivan and her literary treasure map, about exploring the real locations that had inspired the fictional settings of my childhood favorite, about the peace I had found in reclaiming that weekend for my own joy rather than dwelling on exclusion. I mentioned Daniel too, his sketches, our conversations, the unexpected connection that had added another dimension to my solo adventure. Michael listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions, and seeming genuinely interested in this glimpse of my life. "I'm happy for you, Em," he said when I finished. "It sounds like you've built a life that really reflects who you are and what matters to you. I admire that more than I can say." As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Michael hesitated, then asked, would it be okay if I came over sometime to see your garden? And the chickens, I'd like to know more about your world." It was a small request, but a meaningful one, an acknowledgement that reconciliation would involve him stepping into my life, rather than expecting me to accommodate his. It signaled a readiness to value what I had built, rather than measuring it against external standards of success or sophistication. "I'd like that," I told him, finding that I genuinely meant it. "The tomatoes are coming in nicely, and the chickens always appreciate a new audience for their antics." We parted with a hug that felt both familiar and new, a physical embodiment of the tentative reconciliation we had begun. As I walked home, I reflected on the parallel journeys Michael and I had taken that wedding weekend, both of us leaving behind expectations and pretenses, both discovering aspects of ourselves that had been obscured by the dynamics of our relationship, both emerging with greater clarity about what truly mattered. The path forward wouldn't be simple or straightforward. Trust once broken takes time and consistent effort to rebuild. Old patterns can resurface in moments of stress or uncertainty. But as I entered my home, my authentic, imperfect, joyful home, I felt hopeful about the possibility of a new chapter in our sibling relationship. Not a return to the past, but something more mature and genuine, built on mutual respect, rather than obligation or nostalgia. Later that evening, I called Daniel to tell him about my conversation with Michael. As I described the tentative steps toward reconciliation, I realized how grateful I was for the perspective I had gained in Maine, not just about my relationship with my brother, but about the kind of life I wanted to create, the kinds of connections I wanted to nurture. "It sounds like your non-invitation turned out to be a gift in disguise," Daniel observed, "for both of you in different ways." "It did," I agreed, though I wouldn't have seen it that way at the time. "That's how it often works with the best plot twists," he replied, the storyteller in him emerging. "They seem like disasters when they're happening, but then they turn the narrative in a direction you never could have imagined, usually a better one." As we continued talking, making plans for his visit to my town the following month, when he would be traveling for a book event, I thought about how true his observation was. The wedding that never happened had catalyzed profound changes for everyone involved. Catherine and her family lost the opportunity to add Michael to their collection of strategic connections. Michael was forced to confront the authenticity he had compromised in pursuit of status and approval. And I had discovered strengths, possibilities, and connections I might never have explored had I received that embossed invitation to the Plaza Hotel. Sometimes not getting what you think you want opens the door to receiving what you truly need. Sometimes the most painful rejections lead to the most meaningful redirections. And sometimes, when one door closes decisively in your face, the best response isn't to keep knocking, but to turn around and discover the entire world of opportunities waiting behind you. 1 year later, I found myself once again packing a suitcase for Maine. This time, however, I wasn't fleeing from emotional pain, but moving toward a new chapter in my life. The small cottage I had purchased with Daniel's help, finding the perfect location, waited for me, its weathered shingles and blue shutters visible in the photos I kept returning to during the long process of closing on the property. My life had transformed in ways I could never have anticipated during those dark days, when Michael's wedding exclusion had felt like the ultimate rejection. The seeds planted during that first impulsive trip, both metaphorical and literal, had flourished beyond my wildest expectations. Daniel and I had navigated a long-distance relationship for 6 months, with visits back and forth and daily phone calls that deepened our connection despite the miles between us. When his children's book about the Maine coastline was accepted by a publisher, he proposed a celebratory weekend visit that turned into a pivotal moment for both of us. "I can't imagine my life without you in it," he told me, as we walked along the same rocky shore where he had first sketched me. "The distance is getting harder, not easier. I've been thinking—" I had expected perhaps a conversation about one of us relocating, about the logistics of bringing our separate lives into closer proximity. Instead, he led me to a tidal pool, where he had arranged seashells to spell out, "Marry me." With the tide coming in, the message would soon be washed away, a moment of beauty captured in time rather than a permanent declaration. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer," he assured me. "I'm asking if you're open to exploring the possibility of forever, in whatever form that takes for us." His thoughtfulness, his respect for my independence while still expressing his own desires, clearly confirmed what I had come to know over months of getting to know him. Daniel was someone who would add to my life without attempting to reshape it according to external expectations. "Yes," I told him, watching a wave gently rearrange his shell message. "I'm very open to that possibility." In the months that followed, we made plans that honored both of our established lives while creating something new together. I would keep my house in the Midwest, using it during the school year as I continued teaching. Daniel would maintain his Montreal apartment, where he would spend time working with his publisher and teaching art classes. And we would share the Maine cottage as a creative retreat, a gathering place for family and friends, a home that bridged our individual worlds. It wasn't a conventional arrangement, but it suited us perfectly, two independent people who had found each other later in life, who valued the identities they had built separately, but wanted to create a shared future that enhanced rather than diminished those identities. Michael had been among the first people I told about my engagement, our renewed relationship having grown stronger through intentional effort on both sides. He had indeed moved back to the Midwest, securing a teaching position at a high school 30 minutes from my home. The Michael who returned was both familiar and new. The humor and warmth of his younger self combined with a hard-won wisdom and authenticity that made our adult relationship richer than I could have imagined. "I'm so happy for you, Em," he had said when I shared my news, his joy clearly genuine. "Daniel is a lucky man and smart enough to recognize it." Michael had begun dating recently too, a fellow teacher with a passion for environmental activism and a refreshing directness that balanced his sometimes overly analytical nature. It was a relationship based on shared values and mutual respect rather than social advantage or external validation. Our parents had watched with quiet satisfaction as their children found their way back to each other and to partnerships that reflected their truest selves rather than societal expectations. "This is what we always wanted for you both," our mother told me during a family dinner. "Not success as the world defines it, but lives filled with purpose and genuine connection." As I zipped my suitcase closed, I glanced around my Midwest home one last time before the drive to the airport. The house would be well cared for. In my absence, Michael would check on it regularly, and my friend would continue tending the garden and chickens as she had during my first transformative trip to Maine. This summer in the coastal cottage would be about creating new traditions, integrating our separate lives into a shared vision, and preparing for the small, intimate wedding we had planned for September, a celebration on the very beach where Daniel had proposed with family and close friends, bearing witness to our commitment. Catherine's name occasionally still appeared in social media or conversations with mutual acquaintances. After the canceled wedding and subsequent legal battles with Michael over deposits and gifts, she had quickly become engaged to the son of a business associate of her father's, a partnership that seemed more aligned with her family's strategic ambitions than genuine affection. I found I could think of her now without bitterness, recognizing that her priorities and values were simply fundamentally different from my own. My phone chimed with a text from Daniel. "Safe travels. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Mrs. Sullivan has blueberry muffins waiting for your arrival." Mrs. Sullivan had become a dear friend during my repeated visits to Maine, eventually connecting me with the real estate agent who helped me find the cottage. She had been delighted to learn of our engagement, declaring that she had known from our first meeting that Daniel and I had a special connection. "I've been running that B&B for 40 years, she had told me. "I know serendipity when I see it. Serendipity indeed that the pain of exclusion had led me to a place of such profound inclusion that rejection had opened the door to acceptance on a level I hadn't known was possible, that my brother's canceled wedding had ultimately set both of us on paths toward greater authenticity and joy. As I locked my door and loaded my suitcase into the car, I thought about the complex journey that had brought me to this moment. If someone had told me a year ago that being excluded from my brother's wedding would turn out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me, I would have thought they were either cruel or delusional. Yet here I was, heading toward a future richer and more aligned with my true self than anything I could have imagined during those dark days of feeling unwanted and unseen. Life rarely unfolds according to our careful plans. Sometimes the most profound growth emerges from our deepest disappointments. Sometimes the people who hurt us inadvertently open doors to possibilities we would never have explored otherwise. And sometimes not receiving an invitation to one event becomes the catalyst for creating a life to which we can wholeheartedly invite ourselves, a life of authenticity, purpose, and genuine connection. As I drove toward the airport and the future waiting for me on a rocky Maine shoreline, I felt profound gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought me here. The painful exclusion that had once felt like an insurmountable rejection had transformed into the beginning of the most authentic chapter of my life, proof that sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin when we're forced to create our own path forward. Have you ever experienced a painful rejection that ultimately led you somewhere better than you could have imagined? How did you find the courage to turn disappointment into opportunity? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. If this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding joy and authenticity in unexpected places. Don't forget to share with anyone who might be struggling with feeling excluded or rejected. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the first step toward healing. Thank you for coming along on this journey with me. And remember that sometimes the most beautiful destinations are the ones we discover only after our original plans fall apart.